That night, my father did not yell. He simply said, "Vacate the room." 10 minutes later, my brother's pregnant wife surveyed the bedroom I paid for every single month, suggesting I leave the house entirely to keep the peace. I actually packed 3 boxes and left. They never knew I photographed one detail in the property deed before walking out, a detail that brought my lawyer to their family party 27 days later to end it all. My name is Lila Barnes. I am 32 years old, and up until a Tuesday evening in late October, I thought the hardest part of my day was dealing with municipal zoning permits. I pulled into the driveway of my own home, the gravel crunching under my tires, and stopped dead. Nolan's car was parked directly in front of the garage. It was not just parked, it was staged. The trunk gaped open. 2 oversized hard-shell suitcases sat on the porch, flanked by heavily taped diaper boxes and a disassembled bassinet. Nolan is my older brother. He does not visit on a Tuesday unless he needs a loan, a meal, or a favor. I killed the engine. The air felt thick, heavy with the kind of impending storm that only family can brew. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The layout of the living room felt wrong. The sofa had been pushed against the far wall. The coffee table I bought 3 years ago was shoved into a corner to make room for a stack of baby supplies. My father, Wade Barnes, stood in the center of the hallway. He did not look surprised to see me. He did not offer a greeting. He crossed his arms over his chest, blocking the path to the bedrooms. "Vacate the room," my dad said. His voice held no anger. It carried the casual, dismissive authority of a man ordering a laborer to clear a workspace. "Excuse me?" I asked, dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. The clink sounded too loud in the sudden silence. "Vacate the room," Wade repeated, his jaw setting into a hard line. "Nolan and Paige need it." Nolan stepped out from the kitchen. He had a half-eaten apple in his hand and the smug, relaxed posture of a man who had already won a game I did not know we were playing. Behind him stood Paige, his wife. Her hand rested protectively over her pregnant belly. She did not look at my face. She looked at the walls, the floor, the space. "Actually," Paige said, her voice soft but laced with absolute frost, "it would be best if Lila left the house for a while. A newborn needs a calm, dedicated environment. We cannot have people coming and going at all hours." I stared at her. I looked at Nolan, who took a bite of his apple and shrugged, refusing to meet my eyes. Then I looked at Wade. "This is my house," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "This is family," Wade countered immediately, his volume rising just a fraction to assert dominance. "Nolan is having the first grandchild. A man needs space for his family. He cannot be crammed into a 1-bedroom apartment with a baby on the way. You are single. You are capable. You need to step aside and do what is right for the bloodline." I waited for my mother. Carol Barnes appeared from the hallway leading to the garage. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes glued to the hardwood floor as she carried a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. She dropped them at my feet. I recognized the branding on the cardboard. They were the exact same heavy-duty moving boxes I had purchased from the hardware store when I first moved into this house. She had kept them. They had planned this. "Just pack some essentials, sweetie," Carol murmured to the baseboards. "It is just until they get on their feet. Do not make a fuss. Let us keep the peace." A hot, sharp spike of rage flared in my chest, but years of living with Wade Barnes had taught me one vital survival skill: never scream when they want you to break. If I yelled, I would be the hysterical spinster daughter ruining the joyous arrival of the new baby. I stepped around Wade and walked down the hall to my bedroom. The door was already open. The violation hit me like a physical blow. The mattress was stripped. My clothes had been shoved to one side of the closet, right in the middle of the floor. A white wooden baby crib stood half-assembled. Nolan's toolbox sat on my bed. They had not even waited for me to come home. They had simply moved in and started erasing me. I did not throw Nolan's tools into the hallway. I did not smash the crib. I picked up the boxes my mother had so helpfully provided, snapped them into shape, and began pulling my clothes from the closet. I moved with mechanical precision. 5 minutes passed in absolute silence. I opened the bottom drawer of my oak desk to grab my passport and a folder of personal tax documents. My fingers brushed against a thick manila envelope tucked all the way in the back. It did not belong to me. I pulled it out. It was unsealed. Inside was a stack of photocopied property records. I saw my own name printed on the top sheet, Lila Barnes, but beneath it, highlighted in bright yellow ink, was a legal paragraph I did not recognize, referencing a trust and a transfer of deed. Beside my name, someone had forged a set of initials. They were close, but the loops were wrong. My breath caught in my throat. The air in the room suddenly turned freezing cold. They were not just taking my bedroom, Wade's aggressive demand, Carol's pre-purchased boxes, Paige's absolute certainty that I needed to leave the premises entirely. It was not just about making room for a baby. It was a physical eviction to match a legal one. I slid the envelope into my own leather portfolio, shoved it to the bottom of the first cardboard box, and piled my sweaters on top of it. I packed exactly 3 boxes, just enough to look like a defeated woman retreating under pressure. I taped them up. When I walked back into the living room, Wade was sitting in my armchair, watching television. Carol was in the kitchen, wiping down countertops that were already clean. I carried the first box out the front door and down the driveway. I did not say a word. I went back for the second. By the time I carried the third box to the trunk of my sedan, I could hear Nolan's voice drifting out from the open kitchen window. He was laughing. It was a loud, booming, relaxed sound. I slammed the trunk shut. The metallic thud echoed in the quiet suburban street. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, and stared at the house. I had bought those bricks. I had paid for that roof. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I did not cry. I did not panic. I simply let the cold, hard reality wash over me. They wanted me to vacate the room. They wanted me to disappear. I would give them exactly 27 days of peace. And then, I would tear their entire world down. I work as a senior permitting analyst at Ironfield Transit Design, a heavy infrastructure firm based out of Ohio. My entire career is built on reading the fine print, navigating complex municipal zoning laws, and ensuring that multi-million-dollar transit projects do not collapse because someone missed a single signature on a county form. I am disciplined. I live by spreadsheets, logic, and cold, hard facts. I do not make impulsive decisions, and I absolutely never sign a document without reading every single clause. That is why buying the 3-bedroom house in the Columbus suburbs 5 years ago, when I was 27 years old, was never about luxury or a desire to show off my financial independence. It was a rescue mission. Wade had tried his hand at flipping real estate. He poured every dime he and Carol had into a gut renovation project that went disastrously wrong. The market shifted. Contractors walked off the job, and they lost their life savings and their own home to foreclosure. They were weeks away from sleeping in a cheap motel. I stepped in because that is what the reliable daughter does. I had the excellent credit score. I had the stable income. I pulled together my entire savings for a 20% down payment on a modest, solid property with good bones and a quiet backyard. The mortgage was approved solely under my name. I signed every closing document myself. The bank scrutinized my finances for months, verifying every single paycheck and tax return. My name was the only one on the deed, guaranteeing that I held full legal and financial responsibility for the property. We made a verbal agreement in the cramped kitchen of the short-term rental apartment they were about to be evicted from. The terms were supposed to be simple and fair. Wade and Carol would move in with me. They would cover the monthly utility bills like electricity, water, and internet, and they would buy the groceries. I would pay the monthly mortgage, the annual property taxes, and handle any major structural repairs. It was meant to be a temporary safety net to keep our family from falling apart until they got back on their feet. But temporary things have a way of becoming permanent when they are comfortable. And in Wade's mind, safety nets were only meant to catch his son. Wade grew up with a fiercely traditional mindset where the son carried the family legacy and the daughter carried the emotional and logistical burdens. Nolan was the golden boy. He had the kind of effortless, charismatic charm that made people hand him opportunities he never earned and forgive mistakes he never bothered to fix. Beneath that glossy surface, however, Nolan was a walking financial disaster. He bounced from one vague sales job to another, always chasing a massive commission that never materialized. He maxed out multiple credit cards to fund a lifestyle of leased sports cars, expensive dinners, and designer suits, when debt collectors started calling his phone 10 times a day. Wade would quietly bail him out using whatever cash he could scrape together from odd jobs. At one point, Nolan took out a personal loan of $15,000 for a vague tech startup idea. The money was entirely gone in 4 months. Wade defended him, claiming Nolan just needed the right break to become a millionaire and that true entrepreneurs always face early setbacks. Meanwhile, my achievements were treated as background noise, an expected baseline of competence that required no applause, when I earned my promotion to senior permitting analyst, which came with an 18% salary increase. I brought a bakery cake home to celebrate. Wade ate a slice, chewed thoughtfully, and immediately shifted the conversation to a new interview Nolan had lined up at a logistics firm. When I paid off my final student loan installment 2 years ahead of schedule, Carol simply nodded and told me it was a blessing I was finally freeing up my cash flow. Because the house desperately needed a new central air conditioning unit before summer arrived, I became the invisible infrastructure of my own family. I was the plumbing system. Nobody notices the pipes behind the walls until they burst, but everyone expects the water to flow perfectly the second they turn the tap. When the roof leaked during a heavy spring storm, I paid the $7,000 repair bill completely out of my emergency fund without asking for help. When the county property taxes went up by 11%, I absorbed the extra cost without demanding a single additional dollar from my parents. The better I managed things, the more my contributions were viewed as my absolute obligation. Wade stopped seeing the house as a lifeline I had thrown them and started treating it as his rightful domain. He took over the master bedroom almost immediately after we moved in, because he claimed he needed the larger space and the attached bathroom for his bad back. I did not fight him. I took the smaller room at the end of the hall. He began dictating how the yard should be landscaped, complaining about the color I chose for the living room walls, and using my credit card to buy expensive power tools he claimed were absolutely necessary for property maintenance. Carol played the role of the perpetual peacekeeper. But her version of keeping the peace always involved me swallowing my pride to accommodate them. If I ever brought up the fact that Wade was late on his portion of the electricity bill, she would sigh heavily, touch my arm, and tell me to be patient because my father was under a lot of stress. She never once stood up for me when it actually mattered. I was expected to provide endlessly, and they were expected to receive gracefully. I had built a fortress to protect my parents from ruin, and brick by brick, they had turned it into a trap. I thought I was paying for family unity. Instead, I was funding my own gradual erasure. Every single mortgage payment I made was just another brick sealing me inside a space where I was no longer treated as an owner, or even a respected daughter. I was simply a live-in landlord who was not allowed to collect rent, a silent bank rolling over their debts. I had sacrificed my 20s to give them a secure roof, and they rewarded me by deciding I no longer deserved to sleep under it. Gemini said. My new living quarters were technically a utility space. The old laundry room sat tucked at the very back of the garage, a narrow rectangle of exposed concrete and unfinished drywall that absorbed every ounce of heat from the surrounding brick. There was no proper egress window, just a thin slit of frosted glass near the ceiling that let in a muddy gray sliver of daylight and offered zero ventilation. I had to push the bulky washing machine and the heavy dryer flush against the left wall just to wedge a twin-sized mattress onto the floor. The air always smelled faintly of industrial bleach, damp lint, and stagnant heat. Every time someone ran a load of towels upstairs, the exhaust pipe in my low ceiling would shudder and groan. Vibrating right down into my teeth, It was physically suffocating. The temperature often hovered around 85 degrees. I was a ghost haunting the absolute lowest level of my own property, forced to listen to the heavy footsteps of the people who had banished me. Upstairs, the occupation was moving swiftly and shamelessly. On a Thursday evening, I sat on my floor mattress, sweating through my cotton shirt, and scrolled through my phone, only to see Paige's latest social media update. It was a perfectly filtered, high-resolution photo of the nursery. The crib was fully assembled, draped in expensive imported muslin, positioned exactly where my mahogany work desk used to be. The caption read, "Finally settling into our forever home. So blessed to have this beautiful space for our growing family." The post garnered over 200 likes in an hour. Not a single comment acknowledged the homeowner who had been exiled to the garage to make that aesthetic possible. 2 days later, Nolan knocked on the laundry room door. He did not wait for an answer before pushing it open, letting in a draft of exhaust-scented garage air. He announced he needed to borrow my sedan to pick up a vintage dresser he had found online for the baby. I handed over the keys because refusing would immediately trigger a loud, exhausting lecture from Wade about family unity. Nolan returned the car 7 hours later. When I got in to drive to the transit office the next morning, the gas tank gauge was resting firmly below the empty line. He had driven over 80 miles without adding a single drop of fuel. A week after that, I received 2 separate notice letters in the mail for unpaid toll violations, adding up to $35.50 in penalties. The financial demands escalated, shifting from passive expectations to direct, unapologetic orders. Wade stopped asking for favors and started commanding me like an insubordinate employee. He would stand at the top of the garage stairs, his voice booming down into my cramped space. He demanded I transfer funds for the monthly internet bill, the upgraded premium cable package Nolan insisted they needed, and a sudden repair bill for the water heater. "Just wire the money right now," Wade barked one evening, tossing a crumpled invoice down the stairs. "You know how to navigate those mobile banking apps faster than I do, and the plumber needs his $350 by tomorrow morning. Do not make him wait." When I hesitated, gripping the metal stair railing, Carol materialized like a soft shadow behind him. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and gave me that familiar, pleading look. "Just swallow your pride for a little bit, sweetie," she whispered, ensuring the men could not hear her. "Keep the peace. It is only until the baby comes. You know how your brother gets when he is stressed about money." She played the ultimate peacemaker. Yet her peace was always purchased entirely with my silence and my bank account. She never once told Wade to pay his own bills, nor did she ever tell Nolan to buy his own gas. The atmosphere in the house grew thicker, laced with a quiet, frantic energy I could not quite place. I realized that the kitchen island, which usually served as a dumping ground for the Daily Mail, was completely bare. Letters from the bank, annual property tax assessments, and envelopes stamped with urgent red lettering were missing. I eventually found out where they were going. One afternoon, I came home early and caught Wade slipping a thick stack of mail into his jacket. He had purchased a small steel lockbox and bolted it to the shelf inside his bedroom closet. He was actively intercepting the mail before I even walked through the front door. The true depth of the nightmare revealed itself late one night. It was nearing 2 o'clock in the morning. The house was dead quiet. I had crept up the stairs in my socks to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As I passed the living room, I heard low, urgent voices spilling from the darkened backyard patio. Wade and Nolan were standing outside, illuminated only by the glowing orange tip of Nolan's cigarette. "The second disbursement is delayed," Nolan hissed, his tone frantic and tight. "They are asking for another round of identity verification." "Keep your voice down," Wade snapped back, glancing nervously toward the glass door. "I told you we moved too fast. We have to re-sign the indemnity papers before their compliance officer checks the primary file. If she gets wind of the notary log, the whole structure collapses. I need that $50,000 by next week. Dad, you promised this would be clean." I froze. I stopped breathing. Disbursement? Indemnity? 50,000? They were using specialized financial terminology that absolutely did not belong in a conversation about a simple household budget or buying baby furniture. I backed away, stepping carefully on the very edges of the floorboards to avoid any creaks, and retreated to the suffocating heat of the laundry room. I sat on my mattress, my heart hammering against my ribs, staring at the concrete wall and waiting for the sun to rise at exactly 7 o'clock the next morning. My phone buzzed on the cold concrete floor. It was an automated email alert. 14 months prior, I had signed up for a free county property fraud monitoring service, a routine precaution recommended by a senior colleague at the transit design firm. I opened the notification. The subject line was stark and clinical. It stated that a new legal document had been officially recorded against my property parcel number. I tapped the link, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. The system displayed a brief summary of a recent transaction. It was a notification regarding a change in the title ownership profile. Someone had successfully filed legal paperwork altering the deed to my home, pushing it through the county clerk's office. It was a transaction I had absolutely nothing to do with. I stared at the screen as the pieces slammed into place: the locked mail, the intercepted letters, the whispered midnight argument about disbursements. The trap had not just been set, it had already sprung shut. Gemini said I sat cross-legged on my thin floor mattress, the oppressive heat of the utility room pressing against my neck, and opened my laptop. It was exactly 6:15 in the morning. I did not confront my father. I did not march upstairs and demand answers. I am a permitting analyst. When I encounter a structural anomaly, I pull the blueprints. I navigated directly to the Franklin County Recorder of Deeds online portal. The government website was clunky, but my fingers moved with practiced speed. I paid the $2.50 digital access fee using my debit card and downloaded the newest public record attached to my parcel number. The document loaded on my screen. It was a quitclaim deed. The legal formatting was dense, but the vital information was impossible to miss. The paperwork officially stated that I had transferred a 50% ownership interest in my property to a newly formed entity called the Barnes Family Residence Trust. I zoomed in on the electronic image of the final signature page. There, resting on the designated grantor line, was my name. But the handwriting was entirely wrong. I signed dozens of municipal transit permits every single week. I know the exact biomechanics of my own signature. The cursive loop on the capital letter was far too wide. The final stroke of the letter hooked sharply upward to the right, whereas I naturally trail my pen downward. It was a passable forgery to a stranger. But to the woman who owned that name, it was a glaring, sloppy lie. The intellectual shock hit me far harder than any emotional betrayal. My own blood relatives had not merely overstepped boundaries, they had committed a calculated felony. I scrolled down to the secondary attachment. The forged deed was just the foundation. Built on top of it was a deed of trust securing a new home equity line of credit. The principal amount approved by the lender was staggering: $125,000. They had leveraged the equity I had painstakingly built over the last 5 years, using the fraudulent family trust as a co-borrower to bypass my exclusive financial authorization. If Nolan and Wade defaulted on this massive line of credit, the bank would foreclose on the entire property. They could wipe out my initial down payment, drain my home equity, and destroy my credit score for the next 7 years. I scrutinized the notary seal stamped at the very bottom of the page. It was an electronic notarization, authorized by a remote online notary commissioned in the state of Florida. I had never set foot in Florida, nor had I ever utilized a remote digital notary service in my entire 32 years of life. A cold mechanical logic took over my brain. How did they bypass the digital security checks? I opened a new tab, logged into my personal email account, clicked on the settings gear, and navigated to the forwarding and routing rules. There it was. A hidden directive had been created exactly 22 days ago. Any incoming messages containing keywords like verification, signature, notary, or Meridian Crest Financial were automatically marked as read. Forwarded to an unfamiliar address. Barnes Residential Management at a generic mail provider, and immediately swept into my deleted folder. They had hijacked my digital footprint right from the router, while I was either asleep or sitting at my desk at the transit office. I needed absolute confirmation from the outside world. I slipped out the side door of the garage, stepped into the cool morning air, and walked 2 blocks down the suburban street before pulling out my mobile phone. I dialed the customer service number for Meridian Crest Financial, the institution listed on the equity line document, after navigating the automated voice prompts for 10 minutes. A representative named Sarah answered the line. I provided my name and the property address, maintaining a completely neutral tone, and asked for a status update on the recent equity application. "Let me pull up that file for you," Sarah said, her voice cheerfully bureaucratic. "Ah, yes. The funds for the initial draw of $50,000 are scheduled for release in 3 business days. However, we are still waiting on the final identity verification worksheet from the resident manager." I stopped walking, my sneakers locked onto the concrete sidewalk. "Resident manager." "Yes," Sarah replied, completely unaware she was handing me the blueprint to my own financial murder. "The authorized family representative who resides in the home, Mr. Wade Barnes. He is listed as the primary contact for the trust account. He informed us you were traveling extensively for work and prefer not to be contacted directly. Should I update that preference in our system?" "No," I said, my voice shockingly steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "Leave the preferences exactly as they are. Thank you for your help, Sarah." I ended the call. The stakes had just multiplied exponentially. This was no longer a domestic dispute over a hijacked bedroom or a shared utility bill. This was identity theft, wire fraud, and mortgage fraud orchestrated by my own father and brother. If I walked into the kitchen right now and screamed at Wade, he would instantly realize his cover was blown. He would wipe his tablet, delete the email forwarding rules, shred any physical evidence locked in his closet, and spin a narrative that I had verbally authorized the trust before maliciously changing my mind to ruin my pregnant sister-in-law's life. I would be trapped in a brutal, protracted legal battle based on conflicting testimonies. I turned around and walked back to the garage. I did not pack a suitcase. I packed a war chest. I printed every single page of the forged deed, the equity line agreement, and the out-of-state notary stamp. I took meticulous screenshots of the hidden email forwarding rules, capturing the exact date and time they were created to prove premeditation. I gathered my original closing documents from 5 years ago, my bank statements showing I had made every single mortgage payment for the past 60 months, and the property tax receipts. I slid everything into a heavy, waterproof plastic binder. I did not drive to the transit design firm that morning. Instead, I sat in the driver's seat of my car with the engine off and searched the state bar directory on my phone. At exactly 8 o'clock, the very minute their phone lines opened, I booked an emergency consultation with a senior real estate litigation attorney. The battle for my home and my future was not going to be fought over breakfast. It was going to be fought on paper, and I was going to use their own arrogance to bury them. Gemini said the law offices of Kessler and Vance Litigation sat on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Columbus. I sat across a heavy mahogany desk from Naomi Kessler. She was a woman in her late 50s, wearing a tailored navy suit, with eyes that possessed the warmth of a surgical scalpel. She did not offer me coffee or platitudes about how hard family disputes could be. She took the heavy, waterproof plastic binder I had assembled, put on a pair of silver reading glasses, and read every single page in absolute silence for 45 minutes. When she finally closed the binder, she folded her hands on top of the smooth leather surface of her desk. "My first instruction is non-negotiable," Naomi said, her voice perfectly modulated and utterly flat. "You will not say a single word to your father, your brother, your mother, or your sister-in-law. You will not slam doors. You will not glare at them across the kitchen. You will go home, sleep in that garage, and act like a woman who has accepted her defeat. If you tip them off, they will destroy the digital evidence we need to bury them." I nodded once. I understood the assignment. Good, Naomi continued. Because what we are looking at is not a case of overspending relatives or a family misunderstanding. This is organized financial fraud, wire fraud, and forgery. They have engineered a highly coordinated effort to strip you of your primary asset. She pulled a fresh legal pad toward her and picked up a gold fountain pen. She explained that we were going to build a steel frame of evidence, operating on a two-tier strategy. Layer 1 was immediate containment. We had to stop the bleeding and lock down the property before they could siphon the remaining equity. Layer 2 was the offensive build. We needed to gather an ironclad chain of custody for every document and every dollar, ensuring that if we needed to hand this over to the district attorney for criminal prosecution, it would never devolve into a messy, useless argument of your word against theirs. Before I even left her office, Naomi had her paralegal draft an emergency notice of pending legal action to be filed directly with the county recorder. This acted as a massive red flag on the property title, instantly freezing any further attempts to borrow against the house or sell it. Simultaneously, she drafted aggressive preservation demands, known as spoliation letters, and overnighted them to both Meridian Crest Financial and the out-of-state digital notary platform. These letters legally compelled the companies to lock down and preserve all server logs, audio recordings, and Internet Protocol address histories related to the Barnes Family Residence Trust. The efficiency of a high-powered attorney is a terrifying, beautiful thing. By Friday afternoon, 72 hours after I first walked into her office, Naomi summoned me back. She had received the preliminary compliance logs from the digital notary platform. Naomi slid a printed spreadsheet across her desk. The remote notary session, which had supposedly verified my identity to sign away my home, had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Look at the network address, Naomi instructed. Tapping the paper with her pen, I traced the string of numbers. It matched the wireless router installed in my own living room. Now look at the timestamp, she said. The session had occurred at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I pulled up my own employee portal on my phone and showed Naomi my building access logs. At 2:15 on that specific Tuesday, I was swiping my security badge to enter Conference Room B on the 3rd floor of the Ironfield Transit Design Building, 12 miles away from my house. Someone sitting in your living room executed the digital signature, Naomi stated, her tone clinical. Given the video requirement for remote notarization, they likely claimed a broken camera while providing your stolen social security number and driver's license details to bypass the visual check. The platform's security was negligent, but the fraud originated from inside your house. Then, she turned to the money. Naomi had forced Meridian Crest Financial to freeze the account, but she also subpoenaed the ledger for the initial disbursement that had already cleared 2 weeks prior. The first draw had been for $35,000. Wade and Nolan had not just parked that money, they had scattered it with the frantic speed of guilty men. Naomi walked me through the bank trace. Exactly $12,400 had been wired to the State Department of Taxation to settle a corporate tax lien left over from Wade's failed real estate business years ago. $8,000 went directly to a major credit card company, completely zeroing out Nolan's delinquent platinum card. Another $5,000 was issued as a cashier's check, which we quickly traced to a luxury car dealership across town. It was the exact down payment for a brand-new, midnight blue sport utility vehicle registered exclusively in Nolan's name. But the most disturbing revelation involved my mother. According to the bank teller logs Naomi had secured, Carol Barnes had visited a local bank branch 3 times in the span of 5 days. She had withdrawn cash from the new trust account in highly specific increments, $900, then $850, and finally, $920. She intentionally kept the withdrawals under the $1,000 threshold that would trigger a managerial review at that specific branch. The remaining funds had been bounced into a secondary checking account under the trust's name, held for 48 hours, and then swiftly withdrawn to obscure the trail. It was a textbook layering technique used to hide stolen money. I sat rigidly in the leather chair. I felt a cold, hollow space open up in my chest. I had expected selfishness. I had expected greed. I had not expected a coordinated criminal enterprise functioning seamlessly around the dinner table. My father was the architect, my brother was the primary beneficiary, and my mother was the willing bagman. Naomi took off her silver glasses and looked at me with a stark, unwavering intensity. "Lila," she said softly, dropping the rapid-fire legal terminology for a brief moment. "You need to understand the ultimate goal here. Look at the structure of this trust. Look at how they have positioned themselves as the managers and you as a silent, non-participating entity." I met her gaze, waiting. "They are not just trying to borrow your name to clear their debts," Naomi said, her words dropping like heavy stones into the quiet room. "They are preparing to legitimize this entire arrangement as if you never truly owned the house at all. They are building a paper trail to prove that you were merely a placeholder, a straw buyer, and that the property has always belonged to the family collective. If we do not tear this down now, by the time the baby is born, they will legally evict you from the garage." I stared at the meticulous stack of evidence resting on the mahogany wood. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally crystallized into something entirely different. It turned into absolute, unyielding ice. I was not going to just tear it down. I was going to let them build their glass house just a little bit higher, and then I was going to shatter the foundation while they were all standing inside. Naomi's directive was absolute. I needed to remove myself from the immediate blast radius of my own home. 2 days after our initial consultation, I executed a silent, systematic extraction. I did not pack in the evening when the house was full of their suffocating presence. I waited until a Wednesday morning. Wade had driven to the hardware store. Carol had taken Paige to a routine prenatal appointment, and Nolan was presumably sleeping off a late night. I moved through the quiet house with the precise, mechanical efficiency of a tactical retreat. I packed my laptop, my backup external hard drives, my birth certificate, and every single original financial document I possessed. I even went to the garage and boxed up the expensive power drill and the comprehensive wrench set I had purchased for property maintenance, refusing to leave them behind for Wade to claim. I loaded 3 large suitcases into the trunk of my sedan. I had already signed a month-to-month lease on a furnished corporate studio apartment on the north side of the city. The studio was a blank canvas of beige walls and synthetic gray carpet, a stark contrast to the house I had poured my blood and savings into, but it was entirely mine, and more importantly, it was impenetrable. Before walking out the front door for the last time, I placed a single piece of heavy cardstock squarely in the center of the kitchen island. I did not write a furious manifesto. I did not accuse them of federal wire fraud or forgery. The note contained exactly one sentence: "Any future changes regarding this property must go through my legal counsel." I wrote Naomi Kessler's office phone number right beneath it, leaving no room for misinterpretation. By Friday evening, Wade's desperate smear campaign was running at maximum capacity. My mobile phone buzzed constantly with incoming text messages and voicemails from extended relatives I had not spoken to in months. Aunt Susan left a frantic 3-minute voicemail, calling me a selfish, bitter woman who was openly jealous of her younger brother's happiness. Cousin David sent a long, aggressive text stating it was morally disgusting that I would abandon my own family right when my sister-in-law was about to give birth. Wade had spun a masterful, deeply manipulative narrative. He painted himself as the long-suffering patriarch, desperately trying to keep a secure roof over his new grandchild's head, while seamlessly framing me as the unstable, vindictive spinster who threw a childish tantrum over having to switch bedrooms. I did not reply to a single one of them. I simply sat at the small laminate desk in my rented studio, opened a new master spreadsheet, and began cataloging the chaos. I logged every incoming phone call by date, exact time, and duration. I took high-resolution screenshots of every social media post Paige made about her perfect new nursery. I downloaded the audio files of my aunt's accusatory voicemails and saved them to a secure encrypted cloud server. I was professionally trained to manage heavy infrastructure projects. I knew exactly how to take raw, messy data and refine it into an undeniable, chronological timeline. Emotion in a legal battle is a massive liability. Meticulous documentation is a lethal weapon. Nolan, suddenly realizing that his usual tactics of loud intimidation were completely failing in my absence, decided to escalate the situation. On a Tuesday afternoon, my desk phone at the Ironfield Transit Design office rang. It was Marcus, the head of our internal building security team. He calmly informed me that my brother was currently standing in the ground floor lobby, loudly demanding to see me and aggressively refusing to leave the premises. Nolan had attempted to bypass the mandatory visitor sign-in sheet and was trying to physically push past the electronic turnstiles. I had anticipated this exact maneuver. On my very first morning back at the office after discovering the forged property deed, I had provided Marcus with a clear photograph of Nolan and explicit written instructions that he was strictly barred from entering the building. "Do you want me to call the local police precinct?" Marcus asked, his voice steady and professional. "No," I replied, watching the live feed from the lobby security camera on my secondary computer monitor. "Just escort him off the private property. If he resists in any way, issue a formal trespass warning." I watched on the grainy screen as two broad-shouldered security guards quickly flanked my brother. Nolan puffed out his chest, pointed a threatening finger at Marcus, and shouted something I could not hear through the silent feed. But Nolan was fundamentally a coward when faced with actual, unyielding authority. He spun around, kicked the heavy glass revolving door, and stormed out onto the public sidewalk. He could not bully his way into my professional sanctuary. That same evening, my phone vibrated with a massive block of text from Paige. It was a chaotic, rambling mix of hormonal pleading and passive-aggressive blame. She wrote that the extreme stress I was causing the family was terrible for her blood pressure. She demanded to know why I was deliberately trying to ruin the most beautiful moment of her life over a simple, temporary housing arrangement. But it was the final sentence of her message that made the air catch in my throat. "I do not understand why you are acting like you own the place," Paige typed. "It is a family home passed down from your grandparents. We all have an equal right to be here." I stared at the glowing screen in utter disbelief. My paternal grandparents had died completely broke in a rented duplex over 15 years ago. Wade had not just lied to the bank and the digital notary. He had lied directly to his own daughter-in-law. Paige genuinely believed she was moving her new baby into an inherited family estate. She was not a knowing co-conspirator in the real estate fraud. She was a deeply gullible prop that Wade and Nolan were actively using to legitimize their illegal presence in the house. I took a screenshot of the text message, categorized it under internal family communications, and forwarded it directly to Naomi's encrypted email address. Naomi called me the following morning. She confirmed that the paper trail was stacking up beautifully. She had already drafted the formal legal notices required to terminate their license to occupy the premises. She explained that because I had never charged them formal rent, they were not technically tenants protected by standard housing board eviction delays. They were mere licensees, and that specific legal status could be revoked with ruthless speed. "Do we serve them with the termination notices today?" I asked, looking out the window of my studio at the gray city skyline. "Not yet," Naomi replied, her tone sharp and intensely calculating. "We have the perimeter entirely secured, but your father is incredibly arrogant. Arrogant men who think they have successfully gotten away with a major crime always try to push their luck one step further. I want to wait for him to make a fatal overreach. When we finally strike, I want to sever every single escape route he has." I trusted her restraint implicitly. I spent the next 5 days working my regular engineering shifts, eating takeout meals in my quiet apartment, and meticulously updating my evidence logs. The total silence from my end was clearly unnerving them. Wade thrives on constant conflict and manipulation. When you completely deny him an opponent, he becomes reckless. On a Monday morning, exactly 9 days after I had moved my belongings into the studio, an email notification popped up on my phone. The sender was Naomi Kessler. The subject line was completely blank. I opened the message. There was absolutely no text in the body of the email, only a single scanned portable document format attachment. I clicked on the file. It was an official invitation printed on heavy professional letterhead from a boutique private equity firm. The document was titled, Private Closing Consultation and Property Assessment. It explicitly listed the address of my house. It listed the Barnes Family Residence Trust as the primary vendor, and it outlined a formally scheduled meeting to finalize the terms of an agreement I had never authorized, regarding a property transaction I had never initiated. They were not just trying to steal my home equity anymore, they were actively attempting to sell my entire future right out from under me. Gemini said I did not wait for morning. Within 45 minutes of opening that blank email from Naomi, I was sitting back in the leather chair in her downtown Columbus office. The city lights outside her 14th floor window were sharp and cold. On her mahogany desk lay a thick stack of printed email correspondence, completely unredacted. Naomi did not waste time with pleasantries. She pointed her gold fountain pen at the top sheet. Your father and brother are not just draining equity anymore, she said, her voice dropping into a register of pure tactical focus. They are attempting to liquidate your future. They have approached a private equity firm for a high-yield bridge loan, using your house as the primary collateral. But the catastrophic part is the rider attached to it. It includes an option to purchase. I felt the blood drain from my face. I work with municipal land contracts. I know exactly what an option to purchase entails. They were legally agreeing that if they failed to repay this new, massive bridge loan, which Nolan absolutely would fail to do, the private investor had the automatic right to seize the property and take full ownership. They were setting up a mechanism to sell my house at a discount to cover their own reckless gambling debts. How did they get this far without me? I asked, scanning the top email. By writing a brilliant piece of corporate fiction, Naomi replied. She slid the emails closer to me. Look at the signatures and the titles. I read the text block at the bottom of Wade's email. He had formally designated himself as the co-trustee of the Barnes Family Residence Trust. Nolan was listed underneath him as the resident property manager. And me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Naomi flipped to the third page. You are described as the silent, consenting beneficiary. Wade told the private investor that you are a high-level executive who travels constantly and has willingly surrendered the day-to-day management of the family estate to the men of the house. He spun a narrative that you are fully aware of this transaction, but simply prefer not to be bothered with the administrative paperwork. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They were using my actual career success as the very excuse for my absence from the negotiating table. Naomi tapped a glossy printed photograph near the bottom of the stack. It was one of Paige's social media posts, showing her standing in my former bedroom, holding up a tiny yellow infant outfit. The investor wanted proof of the family estate narrative, Naomi explained. They wanted to ensure this was a stable, long-term investment. So, Wade provided them with a complete dossier of domestic bliss. He is using your pregnant sister-in-law as a human shield to legitimize the fraud. He is parading her around as the wholesome reason they need capital to expand the family business. Paige has absolutely no idea she is being used as a prop in a federal crime. I stared at the picture of Paige. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of pity for her. She was irritating and entitled, but she was not a mastermind. She was just another woman Wade was using to get what he wanted, wholly oblivious to the fact that her nesting instinct was being weaponized for a real estate heist. We have a serious tactical decision to make. Lila, Naomi said, her tone suddenly grave. If Wade and Nolan actually sign this option to purchase agreement with the private investor, the legal landscape changes drastically. Right now, it is a domestic fraud case. If a third-party investor signs that contract in good faith, untangling the title will require bringing them into the lawsuit. It will take 3 to 5 years of brutal litigation. It will cost you tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. You will eventually win, but the process will bleed you completely dry. I looked up at her, my mind racing. So we file the injunction right now. We stopped the meeting. We could, Naomi acknowledged, leaning back in her chair. If I file the emergency stop order tomorrow morning, the investor walks away. But Wade will claim it was all a misunderstanding. He will say he was just exploring options and never intended to finalize anything. He will slip out of the worst criminal charges because he has not technically executed the secondary sale. She paused, letting the heavy silence fill the room. Or, Naomi continued, her eyes narrowing slightly, we let them take one more step. We let them attempt to execute the closing documents. If they do that under our surveillance, they lock themselves into undeniable, multi-party commercial fraud. They trap themselves completely. I wavered. It was a terrifying gamble. Letting them get within inches of selling my home felt like standing on a train track and waiting until the very last second to jump out of the way. If we miscalculated, I would lose the only asset to my name. When is the meeting? I asked, my voice steadying as the adrenaline kicked in. Naomi handed me the final document. It was not a corporate calendar invite. It was a digital flyer featuring pastel blue and pink balloons. The private investor demanded an in-person site visit to verify the property and meet the family, Naomi said. A cold, razor-sharp smile forming on her lips. Wade was terrified of looking like a desperate man begging for cash in a sterile boardroom. So, he masked the corporate closing as a social event. He is throwing a combined baby sprinkle and family house blessing party this coming Saturday. He invited the investor as a special visiting friend. He plans to sign the papers in your living room, surrounded by 50 cheering relatives. I stared at the pastel flyer. Wade's supreme arrogance was finally his undoing. He could not just steal my house quietly. He had to turn it into a grand performance. He wanted an audience to validate his triumph, to watch him play the role of the generous patriarch securing his dynasty. He built his own stage, I said softly, the ice in my veins solidifying into pure steel. Exactly, Naomi agreed. And if we time this perfectly, his bragging will create the ultimate venue for our final strike. We will let him pour the champagne. We will let him gather the crowd. And then, we will shatter his entire kingdom right in front of the people he is trying to impress. I handed the flyer back to her. I did not need to think about it any longer. The time for retreating to the garage was over. Draft the final papers, I told her, standing up from the leather chair. We are going to a party, Gemini said. The evidence-gathering phase shifted from passive defense to an aggressive, surgical extraction of facts. Naomi's paralegal managed to subpoena the specific hardware identifiers from the digital notary platform's background data. It was not just an Internet Protocol address anymore. It was the exact media access control address and operating system profile of the device used to forge my signature. It was an absolute, flawless match for the 10-inch silver tablet my father used every single evening to play digital card games in the living room. Wade had not even bothered to use a secure or public computer. His supreme arrogance led him to commit federal wire fraud on the exact same device he used to read the morning sports news. But digital logs can be debated by expensive defense attorneys claiming a device was hacked. We needed boots on the ground. We needed human witnesses to counter Wade's fabricated narrative that I was a silent, absentee investor. I drove back to my neighborhood, parked 3 streets over to avoid being seen from my own driveway, and walked to the home of Ruth Ellison. Ruth was a retired middle school teacher who had lived directly next door to my property for 30 years. I sat at her dining table and asked her what she had observed over the past 5 years. Ruth had watched me personally haul heavy bags of cedar mulch every spring. She had seen me painting the exterior window trims on a stepladder. She remembered me negotiating with the roofing contractors for 3 consecutive weeks after a severe summer storm. When I explained what my family was attempting to do, her face flushed with quiet, dignified outrage. She gladly signed a sworn legal affidavit right there in her kitchen, formally testifying that I was the sole managing owner of the property, and that Wade had always publicly referred to it as his daughter's house until very recently. Naomi's private investigator uncovered an even more damning piece of the puzzle. He tracked down a local residential locksmith who had visited my house 2 weeks prior. Wade had paid the man $200 in cash to swap the deadbolts on the secondary garage and patio doors. The locksmith provided a written signed statement confirming Wade had ordered the service, casually mentioning to the technician that his daughter was finalizing the paperwork to transfer the estate entirely to the family trust. So he was proactively upgrading the security. Wade had been actively rehearsing his corporate fiction on random service workers. The final, most devastating piece of evidence did not come from a subpoena or an investigator. It came from the weakest link in their criminal chain. On Thursday evening at exactly 7 o'clock, my phone received a text message from an unfamiliar prepaid cellular number. It was my mother. She begged for 10 minutes of my time at a bleak, fluorescent-lit diner located just off the interstate highway, miles away from our suburb. I walked into the diner, the smell of old grease and burnt decaffeinated coffee heavy in the air, and found Carol sitting in a corner booth. She looked 10 years older. Her hands trembled violently around a thick ceramic mug. She did not offer a genuine apology or reach out to hug me. Instead, she offered a transaction to save herself. She reached into her purse and slid a small, wire-bound notebook across the sticky laminate table. I opened it. Inside, written in her own careful, looping cursive, was a meticulous ledger of every single dollar Wade had siphoned from the fraudulent equity line. She had documented the exact amounts he paid to his old business creditors, the cash he handed directly to Nolan, and the dates she was instructed to make withdrawals under the bank's reporting limits. He swore it was just a temporary fix, Carol whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the diner entrance as if Wade might suddenly appear and catch her. He promised me that once the new private loan was settled and the baby was safely born, he would draft another legal paper and put your name right back on the title. He said we were just borrowing your good credit for a little while because family helps family. I told him it felt wrong, but you know how angry he gets when he's questioned. Please, Lila, do not let them send him to a federal prison. I kept this book to prove we did not mean to steal it from you forever. I stared at the woman who had birthed me. She knew. My own mother knew they had stolen my home, forged my name, and hijacked my financial identity, and she had completely deluded herself into believing that a temporary felony was acceptable as long as it kept her husband quiet and her golden son comfortable. She was handing me the ledger not to save me from ruin, but to buy her own immunity when the walls inevitably collapsed. I took the notebook, slid it securely into my leather work bag, and stood up. I did not scream at her. I did not offer her absolution. I simply walked out, leaving her sitting entirely alone in the harsh artificial light. The next morning, I placed the wire-bound ledger on Naomi's mahogany desk. Before she could speak, I laid down a single, unbreakable moral boundary. We completely destroy the men, I told my attorney, my voice cold and absolute. Wade and Nolan orchestrated this entire structure. Carol is a willing accomplice, and we will use her handwritten ledger to nail them to the wall. But Paige is an idiot, not a mastermind. And there is an innocent baby arriving in less than 2 months. I will not allow any legal pressure, any civil liability, or any public humiliation to be maliciously aimed at a pregnant woman who was used as a stage prop. We legally penalize the adults who actively chose to commit fraud. We do not punish the child for the sins of the father. Naomi nodded slowly, a look of profound, quiet respect crossing her sharp features. She did not argue. She simply incorporated the boundary into her war plan. She spent the next 3 hours finalizing the master legal binder. It was a masterpiece of procedural destruction. It contained my original, verified property deed, the forged digital quitclaim, the matching tablet hardware logs, the bank routing traces, Ruth's sworn neighbor affidavit, the locksmith's testimony, and Carol's handwritten ledger of the stolen cash. Tucked at the very back were the drafted formal notices of residential termination, perfectly formatted and ready to be served to every adult occupying the premises. Naomi closed the heavy binder, the sharp snap of the metal rings echoing in the quiet office. She stood up and reached for her tailored navy coat. She was heading directly to the county courthouse to file an ex parte emergency petition, seeking an immediate injunction from a senior judge to freeze the property and officially invalidate the fake trust before Wade's grand weekend party. "Go buy a nice professional blazer for Saturday morning," Naomi told me, her eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying, brilliant calm. "If the judge signs this order exactly the way I think he will, we will not need to yell a single word," Gemini said. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone was quietly logging the digital arrogance of Wade Barnes. He had blasted a mass text message to over 40 people. The recipient list included my extended relatives, his old drinking buddies, a half-dozen people from Paige's side of the family, and prominently, the private equity partner. The invitation boasted about a weekend gathering to celebrate the new baby and announce a massive financial stability plan for the family estate. He was framing his crime as a dynastic triumph. But inside the house I had bought, the illusion was beginning to fracture. I would learn later from the digital breadcrumbs and intercepted texts that Paige was finally noticing the structural cracks. She kept finding small, locked steel boxes shoved under Nolan's side of the bed. Whenever she asked about the sudden influx of cash for the new blue sport utility vehicle, Nolan would abruptly leave the room, refusing to look her in the eye. Wade had taken to answering every single question directed at his son, treating Nolan like a silent junior partner in a highly suspicious firm. On Thursday night, Nolan made a fatal conversational error. Paige had apparently expressed intense anxiety about my sudden disappearance and the threatening legal notes I had left behind. Nolan, desperate to maintain his fragile control, tried to spin the narrative. He told her I was just a bitter, jealous sister trying to steal the family house back out of pure spite. But in his frantic rambling, he slipped. He told her not to worry because they had secured a $125,000 safety net, and the new bridge loan would guarantee them $50,000 more in raw cash by Monday. Paige had never been told those specific, massive numbers. She thought they were simply inheriting a paid-off house, not leveraging a corporate debt machine. Her frantic texts to her own sister, which Naomi's investigator legally flagged through open-source data sweeps, showed a woman on the verge of a total panic attack at exactly 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. I was sitting at my rented studio desk when Naomi called. Her voice was sharp, fast, and electric. "We have the signature," she said. The senior county judge had reviewed the mountain of evidence, the tablet hardware logs, the neighbor's sworn affidavit, the forged digital signature, and my mother's handwritten ledger. He did not grant a full, permanent judgment without a formal trial, but he granted something far more tactically devastating right now. He issued a temporary ex parte emergency order. It immediately froze all financial transactions tied to the property, completely stripped the Barnes Family Residence Trust of any legal authority to act on my behalf, and explicitly authorized direct, unannounced service of the injunction at the premises. Simultaneously, the legal clock had run out on my family. The formal notice terminating their license to occupy the property, which Naomi had quietly mailed to them 30 days prior, had officially expired at midnight. Wade had completely ignored the certified letters, arrogantly believing his newly forged trust documents rendered my eviction warnings powerless. He thought his fake paper armor was bulletproof. Saturday morning arrived with a clear, bright sky. I did not dress for a family gathering. I dressed for a corporate execution. I bypassed the casual weekend clothes in my rented closet and pulled out a sharply tailored charcoal blazer, a crisp white silk blouse, and dark slacks. I applied minimal, muted makeup. I wanted absolutely no trace of hysteria or emotional vulnerability on my face. I was not a heartbroken daughter going home to cry and scream at her abusers. I was a senior analyst, and I was about to deliver a presentation on catastrophic structural failure. I slid the master legal binder into my leather bag. Every single section was neatly organized with brightly colored plastic tabs, red for the forged deed, yellow for the bank traces, blue for the judge's emergency freeze order. Naomi had orchestrated the final strike with military precision. She was not just bringing a private process server to hand over papers. She had coordinated with a county sheriff's deputy to execute the service, ensuring Wade could not physically intimidate his way out of the situation. Furthermore, she had quietly contacted the regional compliance officer for Meridian Crest Financial, the bank holding the fraudulent equity line, and informed them that a secondary private investor was about to sign papers on a property they technically held a massive lien on. The bank representative was livid and demanded to be present to protect their own corporate interests. At exactly 1:45 in the afternoon, I turned my sedan onto my old street. I did not pull into the driveway. I parked 3 houses down, killing the engine and rolling down the window just an inch. The air was thick with the smell of expensive catered barbecue. A massive arch of pastel blue and pink balloons fluttered wildly against the front porch pillars. I could hear the loud, booming sound of Wade's laughter echoing across the manicured lawn, mixed with the clinking of glasses and the cheerful chatter of oblivious relatives. They were celebrating their absolute victory over me. I sat in the driver's seat, perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the cool leather of my steering wheel. Beside me, the heavy binder sat ready. I watched a sleek black luxury sedan pull up to the curb. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. The private investor had arrived. I glanced in my rearview mirror. Naomi's silver car was already idling at the corner of the block, the marked county sheriff's cruiser tucked discreetly right behind her. The trap was fully loaded. The audience was seated. I took one deep, slow breath, knowing that in less than 5 minutes, the knot would be permanently severed. I stepped out of my sedan. I walked up the driveway just as Wade clinked his glass against the microphone stand he had rented. "To our family home," his voice boomed over the speakers, "and to the bright, secure future of my first grandson." The applause was just starting when the crowd noticed me. Silence rippled outward from the front lawn to the porch. Every single eye locked onto my charcoal blazer. Wade's smile vanished. He shoved his champagne flute onto a nearby table and marched down the steps to intercept me before I could reach the patio. "You have no right to be here, Lila," he hissed, his face flushing dark red. "Leave right now before I call the police." I did not even break my stride. I simply stepped aside as Naomi Kessler materialized right behind my right shoulder, flanked by a uniformed county sheriff's deputy. "Actually, Mr. Barnes," Naomi's voice cut through the heavy barbecue-scented air like a sharpened blade. "We are the ones bringing the police, and we have some deliveries for you." The deputy stepped forward, handing a thick manila envelope directly into Wade's chest. He instinctively grabbed it. "Wade Barnes," the deputy stated loudly, "you are officially served." Naomi did not give him a second to recover. She raised her voice, projecting clearly to the 50 guests, the private equity investor, and Paige's stunned family members. "By order of the county court, all financial and real estate transactions involving the Barnes Family Residence Trust are completely frozen. The quitclaim deed recorded in this county is temporarily invalidated pending a federal fraud investigation, and you are strictly barred from transferring or mortgaging this property." A woman in a sharp gray suit stepped out from behind Naomi. "I am the Regional Compliance Director for Meridian Crest Financial," she announced to the crowd, her eyes locking onto the horrified private investor. "The previous equity line drawn on this property is currently under active investigation for wire fraud and identity theft. We will not recognize, subordinate to, or honor any new financial commitments made by these individuals." The private investor dropped his leather briefcase onto the grass, his face completely pale. He turned around and walked straight back to his luxury sedan without saying a single word. Naomi pulled out a second set of documents with bright red tabs. "Furthermore," she continued, her tone relentless, "the license to occupy this residence expired at midnight. You were served a 30-day notice, which you ignored. I am now executing a civil writ of possession. Wade Barnes, Carol Barnes, and Nolan Barnes, you are legally ordered to vacate these premises immediately." Wade exploded. He spun around, spreading his arms wide to the shocked audience. "This is insane," he bellowed, trying to manipulate the crowd one last time. "This is just a massive family misunderstanding. My daughter is having a mental breakdown because she is jealous of her brother." Naomi smiled. It was a terrifying expression. She pulled out the plastic-bound master file. "A misunderstanding?" she asked smoothly. "Is that what you call the digital media access control logs, proving you forged your daughter's signature from your personal tablet? Is that what you call the bank trace showing you used her stolen equity to pay off your old corporate tax liens? Or perhaps," Naomi pulled out the small wire-bound notebook, holding it high in the air, "you mean the handwritten ledger your own wife kept, detailing every single dollar you illegally siphoned from the fraud?" The silence on the lawn was absolute. You could hear the breeze rustling the pastel balloons. Paige stood near the front door, her hands shaking uncontrollably over her pregnant belly. She looked at Wade, then at Nolan, who was staring at his shoes, refusing to speak. The color drained from her face as the utter reality of her situation hit her. She had been completely scammed, used as nothing more than a moral shield to validate a crime. She reached into her maternity dress pocket, pulled out the heavy brass key to my house, and threw it onto the wooden porch deck. "I am not raising my baby in a stolen house," Paige said, her voice cracking but surprisingly loud. "I am calling my sister. I am leaving right now." She turned her back on her husband and walked inside to pack her bags. The facade shattered instantly. Nolan panicked, pointing a trembling finger at our father. "He told me it was legal. He said he had a loophole." Wade lunged forward, grabbing Nolan's shirt collar. "You spineless coward. You spent $8,000 of it on your credit cards." Carol broke down into loud, ugly sobs, sinking onto a patio chair. "Everyone knew it was wrong," she wailed into her hands. "But nobody would just stop." The Great Barnes family unity died right there on the grass, tearing each other apart the moment the consequences arrived. The deputy stepped between the two men, resting his hand on his duty belt. "You have exactly 3 hours to remove your personal items and get off this property," he commanded. "If you are still here at 5 o'clock, you will be leaving in handcuffs." Naomi looked at the remaining guests, who were slowly backing away toward their vehicles. "Just to be perfectly clear," my attorney said, her voice calm and even, "my client is not evicting a child. She is simply reclaiming her stolen property from 3 adults who committed federal forgery." 2 hours later. The balloons were gone. I stood alone on my front porch, the cool afternoon breeze sweeping away the smell of the ruined party. I watched Wade, Carol, and Nolan silently load the last of their hastily packed garbage bags into their cars. No one screamed, no one argued. The truth had been stamped, served, and flawlessly executed. Wade refused to look at me as he backed his car out of my driveway for the last time. I reached down, picked up the brass key Paige had thrown onto the deck, and locked my front door. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from today, so we can interact and share our thoughts together. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us even more by hitting the hype button so that the story in this video can be heard by many more people.